Got the notebooks out? Are you ready, honey? You going? Okay, hi folks at home. We're talking abolitionists today. Let's have a definition first thing. An abolitionist is someone who wants to abolish slavery. So the definition is someone working to end slavery. Someone working to end slavery. Okay? Let's just take a hot button today, an issue like racism. You could say, hey, I don't like racism, but that doesn't make you anybody that's working against it. So an abolitionist is actively working against slavery, wants to end it. All righty. Okay, let's see if we're working today. Look at that. Okay.
Very.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, let's think about this. Remember, there are dirty toilets in the world. That's an important point because toilets don't clean themselves. So let's take the easy one. You got a really nasty toilet down south. Who's going to clean it? Slaves. Slaves are going to do that work. Why? Because if they don't, maybe they're beaten, maybe they're whipped, maybe they're starved. Who knows? But there's a power structure such that all the nastiest jobs go to the slaves down south. Up north, who's going to do the job? Oh, they're just going to have filthy, horrible toilets that just keep multiplying? No.
Whoever's working.
Who would do it?
That's their job.
Who would do the nastiest job?
The people, like, black
They
people.
don't have no slaves up north. That's more localized down in the south.
Whoever were hired to do.
Yeah.
Immigrants?
Probably a lot of immigrants. Why immigrants? Because they're lacking something that allows them to get better jobs. What are they lacking? Yeah, language skills. They're lacking English language skills. This is one of those things that, all right, let's see if we can be honest here. All right. What do most people that are bussing tables in restaurants look like?
Fancy.
Be honest. Let's not be politically correct. What are most people that are bussing tables? Oh, come on, be real. Yeah. Come on, guys, they all have something overwhelming in common.
They're all really young.
No, I've seen some old ones. No, come on, you're being silly now. Come on. How about Hispanic? There's an awful lot of Hispanic people that wait tables. Are they doing it because they're just stupid people? No, not at all. Why are they doing it?
Because they're like, they don't know the new country language is.
So what are they doing while they're bussing tables?
They're doing the easy stuff.
What are they getting while they're bussing tables? They're listening to people. They're getting spoken American English hours a day while they're working in the restaurant. That's the best way to advance themselves. And incidentally, don't stop and say, oh my gosh, you can always tell from an immigrant, it's just, they can't do anything. True story. When I worked at the Walgreens, right across the street from 16th and Wisconsin Avenue, right across the street from Marquette University. And there was a fellow who came in. We have lots of vendors, the big muscle guys who come in, they're taking in big dollies full of soda and stuff. Well, we had a guy come in and he brought in the juice and the Snapple, which are really big sellers then. And he brought in the juice and the Snapple. He helped set up the display of it and everything. And this guy was different. An awful lot of the guys that brought that stuff, the Coke guy and the Pepsi guy and everything, they were, I don't know, big, strong, ex-Marine kind of guys, And this guy was very different. He had a manicure. His hair was always done perfectly. His shirts were just exactly right. And I thought, he's just a little different. I wonder what that's all about. And so one time, had a little extra time, he was over there working in the display. And I went over and I introduced myself. His name was Yovo, which happens to be Yugoslavian for Joseph. And I talked to this guy for a little bit, and here he is putting in juice so that college kids can have their Snapple. And he was, in Yugoslavia, a lawyer. But Yugoslavian law is not American law, he couldn't jump over here and instantly be an American lawyer. Different. Also, he had actually been respected enough in his community. He was a member of their Yugoslavian, their equivalent of Congress. So this was an important man. And this was back when there was a Yugoslavia and one was communist, and he had a son. And he realized, although they were well connected, he wanted freedoms for his child. So he came over to the United States with his wife and his kid, so that his kid could be raised with some freedom. And the most fascinating thing about this was there was nothing in this man that said he was ashamed of what he was doing. There was nothing in this man that said, oh, this is below me. It was just a fact. I chose this because this was a way to get my child to freedom. So I chose this and I am happy to do it. This is my life. This is what I wanted because that's what I want to give to my son. So I just found him to be such a fascinating person. Yeah.
What is Snapple?
Oh, you guys haven't even heard of
No,
Snapple?
Snapple's that's the juice thing.
Hey, wait a
Snapple's like
second.
the juice thing.
Snapple is kind of a juice, some of it's tea thing. It's,
Oh, that.
yeah.
Orange
All right, anyway.
It's a glass bottle.
So don't sell immigrants short, but immigrants coming over, particularly those who do not have English, like somebody coming over, they're Irish, they have an accent, but they're English speaking. Somebody from Italy or from Germany or from Africa, so they may not be. So what are they doing? They're getting jobs that don't require those language skills, and those are generally low-level jobs. Society looks at them. So down south, it's going to be the slaves that are going to be cleaning the toilets. Up north, it's going to be immigrants, for the most part, coming over that can't find something better. Now, when the immigrants came over, and there were a lot of people still looking at this as the land of opportunity, you could come here and you could get freedom. Perhaps you could get a farm. You could get things that you were not available in Europe to the ordinary person. So this is kind of how the country was divided. We'll go ahead. This is how the country was divided. The dark blue here was what would become the Union, the North, the free area. The South is down there where slavery was so heavy. They're in red in this. And the light blue, those are border states, kind of in between. And the people on both sides of the argument. But immigrants would come over here and they'd say, okay, I have no chance to get a really good job. I have to start off my life in America doing something kind of menial. So do I want to go down here? Probably not, because they have slaves to do the menial jobs. It might be very hard to find employment down here. How about up here? Now, this seems to be much more opportunity. So most of the immigrants went to the north instead of the south. Did you ever wonder why the slaves didn't just say, no, we won't be slaves anymore? Why did the slaves not do that? Okay, what kept them in order? Give me a real answer or don't give me an answer. Well, actually, down in the South, there were actually more black people than white people in South Carolina for a while.
They can't already
There you go. The white people had weapons. If you may be able to go out in the barn and steal a pitchfork and the other guy has a shotgun, who's going to win the argument? It's going to be the guy with the shotgun. Now, it's an interesting thing. Let me give you a little background. You know, they have those military schools, Texas A&M, Georgia A&M, and the Citadel, Virginia Military Institute, and there used to be dozens of military colleges around the South. You know what the purpose of those were? They were militias to put down slave rebellion. Here's the deal. If you come, we'll give you an education, you train as a military unit, and if the slaves have an uprising, you go put it down. That's the deal. Okay? But every county, every area had to have some armed ability to get the guys together and put the slave rebellion down. Now, here's the way it worked. There were different kinds of slave owners. We talked about that yesterday. There were kind ones, there were unkind ones. So let's just take three people here. You have Mrs. Wright, and she's kind. She is kind to her slave owners, or to her slaves. So, you know, if she's got an old dress or something, she might give it to one of the slave women. If she's made some bread or something, she might give a few little pieces to the slave children. And, you know, if one of the people is sick down on Slave Street, and again, I'm not making fun with Slave Street, that's actually what some of the plantations called the shacks where the slaves were kept. Somebody's sick down on Slave Street, well, she might go down there and nurse them. So she's kind to her slaves. Now, what happened with Mrs. Belcher is uh, she's kind of ambivalent. You know, she doesn't, well, maybe wasn't raised around slavery. She's not really kind of comfortable or uncomfortable with it. It's just been her world. So she just kind of ignores the slaves. She's not nice to them. She's not mean to them. She just uses them as you do slaves. Then there's one mean one in the crowd. Oh yeah, I'll tell you what she does. Mrs. Anderberger, who gives them Mrs. Anderberger. She, if a slave even looks at her, she has the foreman beat him. You know, if a slave doesn't bow down or whatever, you know, she makes sure their food is taken away for a couple of days. She's mean. And as a matter of fact, her husband is mean too. And they get to be so awful to the slaves that eventually there's a slave rebellion on their property. They say, I don't care if they have guns. We grab an axe, we grab a club, we grab a stick, we grab a rock, and they go over and they kill the Anderers. Now, don't talk, you're dead. Okay, so they go over and kill them. Now the word goes out, slave rebellion at the Anderer plantation. Here's what's going to happen. They're going to go put it down, and then your husband's going to come back. And he's going to say, these slaves are getting a little out of control. If one of them even looks at you, you tell the foreman to beat them. If they don't bow to you or whatever, you make sure that they get some punishment. She just moved from being neutral to being mean. And your husband comes home and says, no, I don't want you going down to Slave Street to nurse anybody anymore. No more bread for the little kids in the back of the house. Old dress, I'd rather you burn it than give it to a slave woman. No, not going to happen. We're not doing this anymore. You move from being nice to being neutral. That's hardening their hearts. What had become good people slipped away so that they weren't such nice people. All right. The Missouri Compromise. Get ready. We've got to have an explanation here. Did we skip something? What did we skip?
Religious groups, Quakers are at the center of abolition
And we lost the
activities.
Quakers? You can't do that. Hang on. There you go. Let's talk Quakers. Nothing is better for thee than me. Stop that for a second. Would you please pause that for a second, Riley? Hang on, please, huh? Thank you. Okay. Now listen to me carefully. Quakerism, the Society of Friends, is a religion. Their core beliefs, if you remember when we talked about this before, everyone is their friend, everyone is their equal, and they do not believe in the use of force. They are pacifists. Everyone is their friend, everyone is their equal, and they are pacifists. Well, if you saw your friend being beaten and being held as a slave, wouldn't you want to do something about it? That's what the Quakers did. Not all Quakers, but most Quakers became involved in the abolitionist movement. When you talk about the Underground Railroad, there were a lot of Quakers involved. But abolitionism is not a religion. It is not a religion to be an abolitionist. You could have somebody that didn't believe in God at all but wanted to fight against slavery. That's not a religion. Many Quakers were abolitionists, but not all abolitionists were Quakers. There were people of many different religions who worked to end slavery. All right. So, all right. The Missouri Compromise. I'll explain it over here on the big map. People have been moving west. You have the Indian nations down here, okay? And now the state of, or the territory of Missouri, the Missouri territory is filled in, and Missouri wants to become a state. And remember what the requirements are. They're still using the Northwest Ordinance. The requirements are you have to have a reasonable boundary. They must have a reasonable population. They must have a Republican form of government, and they have to ask. That's all. Those are the only requirements for a territory to become a state. Well, Missouri had a reasonable population. Missouri had a reasonable boundary. Missouri was going to have a Republican form of government. They were going to elect their government. And Missouri asked, may we please become a state? But this was a problem. Because you see, if they just made another state, people of Missouri had slaves. This would be another pro-slavery state. That meant 2 more senators, and they'd vote for any slavery bills that came along. The people who were elected to the House of Representatives would be pro-slavery. The balance that they had worked out in Congress would be shot. It would now lean towards the pro-slavery people. So they said, we can't do this. We can't just let them in. But there was no free territory ready to become a state yet. So they worked out this compromise. This is 1820. And they said, all right, here's what we're going to do. We will let Missouri in. Missouri will be a slave state. That's step number 1. You have to have these down to know the states. Missouri is going to be a slave state. They're in. Everybody look over here. Remember, there was Virginia first as a colony. Then there was Massachusetts. And pretty soon they started nicking things off of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, New Hampshire. But they never took Maine off of Massachusetts. They're not even physically connected after New Hampshire was formed. But this was still part of Massachusetts. And they said, okay, we have to keep our balance, so we will allow Missouri to come in as a free state, and at exactly the same moment, we're going to break Maine off and make that a free state. So now we get 2 more free senators, 2 more slave senators, our balance is kept. Yes, we do.
Did you mean Missouri is slave state?
Missouri was a slave state. Yes, did I pick them up?
Yeah. You said
Okay,
free.
blame Eloise. Okay, so
Boo.
Missouri is the slave state, Maine is the free state. Missouri would enter as a slave state, Maine would come in as a free state. Now, here's where it gets a little hairy. I'll give you a second, you're all writing. So, hi folks at home. Hope you're all writing too, taking good notes. Okay, now how bad would you guys have felt if this would have been a snow day and you got to stay home? Oh yeah, you're already there. You ready? Here we go. All right, take a look. Missouri comes in as a slave state. Maine comes in as a free state. But they wanted to address what was going to happen in the future in the Louisiana Territory, because not that many people lived out there. So they made another part of this compromise. They said, okay, there will be no more slaves allowed in the whole Louisiana Territory north of 36 degrees, 30 minutes longitude in the Missouri Territory. So that meant nothing above the southern border of Missouri. There could be no slaves there in the rest of the Louisiana Territory. We'll give you Missouri, but we don't want slavery spreading anywhere else. Okay, that's written. 36 degrees, 30 minutes. It's kind of a weird way to measure longitude and latitude is there are 60 minutes in a degree. And no, you can't say 36 and a half. 36 degrees, 30 minutes. That's just in the Louisiana Territory. I'm not talking about anything east of the Mississippi. That's just in the Louisiana Territory. Okay, so the first big compromise they've reached on, or another big compromise they've reached on. Okay, you know what? Abolitionists were working to end slavery, and they were hated. And they were hated everywhere. Some of the information I'm going to say is on there, some of it isn't, so we should listen up and take some more notes. Abolitionists were hated in the North. They were hated in the North because if slaves were freed, understand this, don't just write something else, listen to this. If slaves were freed, chances are hundreds of thousands of them would come up north, and what jobs could they get? The low jobs that the immigrants, that's the only thing the immigrants could get. So there are lots and lots of immigrants up north. They don't want the slaves to be free. It's not that they hated black people. It's not that they loved slavery. It's that they're trying to feed their families, and those are the only jobs they could get. They don't want maybe 1 million people moving north to compete for the job they have. Also, the northern people were working in mills. The mill owners, they liked the cheap cotton. Slavery provided cheap cotton. It allowed those mills to work and for them to get the wages they were getting, even though the wages became smaller and smaller. And of course, abolitionists were hated in the South because it was a slave economy. The people of the South felt that's the best thing for their lives, for their pocketbooks. That's just the way the world should work. And again, take off your blinders. It's so easy just to put everything in our frame of reference for right now. But if you were having an argument with somebody back then, they'd say, okay, wait a second. Let's see. The ancient Egyptians had slaves. The ancient Greeks had slaves. The ancient Romans had slaves. There were slaves in the Middle Ages. Slaves in the Middle East. Still are some slaves in the Middle East. Slaves in Africa. Still are some slaves in Africa. There's slaves in all parts of the world. Why can't we have slaves? And that might be a hard argument to make. If somebody said, well, geez, you know, it's wrong, but why? Everybody's done it. Everybody's done it from the time of the creation of the world. Why? So, again, you can't just say, well, we know it's wrong. And we do know it's wrong. But that's because we believe in the dignity of humanity, and that wasn't quite the same thing as they believed back then. So don't try to put our morals back on them. Okay. There was the place where abolitionism was the most powerful was up in the Northeast in New England. And when this compromise was reached and they said, okay, we're going to let you have slavery over there, the abolitionists in New England were so angered by this, saying that, hey, if we have a government that will accept the expansion of slavery even a little bit, maybe we ought to secede. Maybe we ought to leave the country. That's what secede means, break away, become something separate. So we know that in history, it was the South that eventually seceded and had the Civil War, but it was New England that threatened it first. That we're going to secede because you allow any kind of slavery. Cool. All right. This handsome guy is Frederick Douglass. Very, very interesting person. And he was a former slave. And he had escaped. And to his dying day, he would never tell anyone how he escaped. We do know how he escaped. We found it out later from writings from other people, but he would never tell anyone. Why wouldn't he tell anyone? I mean, he already escaped. You're kind of on the trail, but not quite right. Yeah.
The slave catchers would, guard those routes.
Exactly. The slave catchers would shut those routes down. They wouldn't allow anybody else to escape. So since he valued his freedom, he wanted other people to have freedom too. So while there was slavery during his lifetime, he wouldn't tell because he wanted other people to be able to escape the same way. And after slavery was over, there'd been a civil war, and the current estimates now is probably about 1 million people, maybe more, died in the Civil War or right after it from the diseases and the injuries. And the people down south were angry. They were looking for someone to punish, and if they found out that their neighbor over here had helped slaves escape before, they might punish them. So he did not want anything bad to happen to the people who had helped him escape. What happened was he was a slave in Maryland. Maryland is actually quite a heavy slave area. And he escaped. He was hidden on a ship. It was sailing up Chesapeake Bay, and it went up to Philadelphia, where they turned him over to abolitionists in the Underground Railroad that scooted him further up north. Okay. He became an abolitionist speaker. He went around and talked to people. And he became the face of slavery. He put a face on slavery. If you talk about the Green Bay Packers, chances are the first picture most people get is Aaron Rodgers. That's the face of the Green Bay Packers. Okay? Tell me somebody else that is the face of something.
I forgot.
All right?
Jeff Bezos,
Absolutely. Jeff Bezos is the face of Amazon, without a doubt. He may even be, okay, who's the face of technology? Bill Gates, right? There are certain people that when you talk about a subject, boom, that's it. Yeah.
I got it now. The face of basketball is LeBron James.
Oh, good. The face of basketball is LeBron James. Sorry. What? The face of the Buccaneers would be Tom Brady. Yeah, it's true. So these are people that you immediately envision, and when you're talking about a subject, you envision them. Well, Frederick Douglass became the face of slavery. Now, having a face to something is so vitally important. I mean, face it. You guys ever get up late at night and maybe turn on the TV and they've got one of those like Save the Children programs on? You know, where you can send money in and feed some starving kids. You know why they do that? It's because if I were to say to you, there are starving children in Africa, you might go, that's terrible, and not do a thing about it. I remember one time I got up late and I turned on the TV years and years ago. There had been a drought and a famine in part of Africa. And I was watching one of those shows. And there had been a photographer who was at this scene. And he caught this picture. And what it was there was this little African girl walking across a road. And she was starving to death. And she just said, you know, you've seen starving people. They have nothing for arms and nothing for legs. And their head is just like a skull. And they have their little distended belly, which means bacteria is working the wrong way inside them, and it's kind of a pathetic thing. But this little girl came to the middle of the road and collapsed. There was just nothing left in her. And a vulture came down and was right next to her. And if this person had not been there, then that vulture would have started to eat that living little girl. I saw that picture, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm opening up my wallet. I have to give something. I can't look at this and say, oh, there's people starving in Africa. Oh, boring. Yeah, that's scary stuff. She became the face of hunger in Africa. You got to look at this and you got to say, okay, now I get it. Now I see something awful. What else about Frederick Douglass? He was articulate. He could speak well. He could write beautifully. Frederick Douglass, let's see. he talked about, I'm just gonna read you a little bit of it. He was talking about standing out on the shore of Chesapeake Bay and watching the ship. These are his words. Our house stood within a few rods of the Chesapeake Bay, whose broad bosom was ever white with sails from every quarter of the habitable globe. Those beautiful vessels robed in purest white, so delightful to the eye of freemen, were to me so many shrouded ghosts to terrify and torment me with thoughts of my wretched condition. I've often in the deep stillness of a summer's Sabbath stood all alone upon the lofty banks of that noble bay, and traced with saddened heart and tearful eye the countless number of sails moving off to the mighty ocean. The sight of these always affected me powerfully. My thoughts would compel utterance, and there, with no audience but the Almighty, I would pour out my soul's complaint in my rude way, with an apostrophe to the moving multitude of ships. You are loosed from your moorings and are free. I'm fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's swift-winged angels that fly around the world, and I am confined in bands of iron. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on one of your gallant decks and under your protecting wing. Alas, betwixt you and the turbid waters roll. Go on, go on. Oh, that I could also go. Could I but swim. Oh, if I could fly. Why was I born a man of whom to make a brute? The ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance, and I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. Oh, God save me. God deliver me. Let me be free. Is there a God? Why am I a slave? I will run away. I will not stand it. Get caught or get clear. I'll try. I had as well die with ague as the fever. I have only one life to lose. I had as well be killed running as die standing. Now think about it. You have these people saying black people are not human beings. They're close. They're 3/5 of a person for voting. They are, not quite the real thing. They're still animals. Do you think your dog sits around the living room saying, is there a God? No. Your dog's an animal. Your cat's an animal. A black person is a human being. Those are the thoughts of a man, articulately expressed. And that takes away that thought, that argument that black people were not human. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to double check because of late arrivals, who is still missing.
We have Haley, Chloe, anybody else?
Okay,
These-
so
Haley and
Ally
Chloe.
and Chloe. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Okay.
Someone sit there? No.
Okay. He told of his own life, which I do not have time to tell you today. We go till 9, right?
I want to see that.
You'll get it Thursday morning. There's not much more to tell. There's only a couple of slides, but I don't want to rush it. Guys, so big. Do not forget to charge your Chromebooks